Croeso nôl, diolch am aros i'r ail sesiwn. Mae'n braf i'ch weld chi unwaith eto. Thank you for staying for the second session. And because it's very important that we apply what we've been hearing. And that's what today is all about. Today isn't a conference where we get stuff and then carry on as we were. Today is a day when we begin to think strategically about tomorrow. And that's what the book's about. That's why we're giving it to you. To ask, what are we going to do? What's the plan? And how are we going to do it? Because the future in the church in Wales, there are some lively churches, but we have to ask, how many people have joined those churches by transfer? How many people are seeing lost people become found people very regularly? Because the majority of churches are not seeing anybody. And between the M4 and the A55, with one or two exceptions, or three or four exceptions, the situation is very serious. And south of the M4, there will be churches that continue, but not on the present model will we start to see things extend, because we tend to be strengthening what we've got, not taking what we've got somewhere else. So that's what I want us to think about in this afternoon session. And how do we establish Christian presence, Christian witness, if we are to have a mission to Jerusalem, where we are, and Samaria, that's people that look like us, but they're not quite the same, and the ends of the earth. We probably have a plan for many of those, but what's the plan for Judea? Because it's our responsibility to see the gospel prosper in the land that we are a part of. And it's something we have to do together. We're not looking to individual, they'll do it. They're City Temple, Cardiff, they'll win the rest of Wales. No, it's something that we do together. So how are we going to do that? So read the book, recommend the book, and hopefully, as your leadership teams, read it together and ask the questions, what is God asking us to do in response to this? And if you meet with other leaders in fraternals or whatever, why not say, well, let's just use this season to ask ourselves together, what do we do? Because we need a start. We need a must-do agenda. We don't need kind of more, we could do, because we won't. We need some must-do agendas. We need to rethink mission. That's what Waleswide does. We are a provocation organisation. We kind of keep banging on about the same thing, envisioning, warning, urging, without an apology. Because if we don't see the foundation of the next generation now, in many places there won't be a next generation. So we all have to ask ourselves the question, who is my successor? Am I just going to have one person following him? Am I going to have a number of people that I will raise up and equip? So those are the questions. But before we kind of come to the outworking, let's go back to Acts 9. We'll pick up with the verse where it got nice and quiet in Jerusalem and everybody was at peace. I could see that you like that. Then the church throughout Judea, Galilee and Samaria enjoyed a time of peace, and it was strengthened and encouraged by the Holy Spirit. It grew in numbers and living in the fear of the Lord. As Peter, now the camera's moving now, it's no longer on Paul, the camera is moving on Peter. Notice what it says. As Peter travelled about the country, he went to visit saints in Lydda. There he found a man named Aeneas, a paralytic who had been bedridden for 8 years. Aeneas, Peter said to him, Jesus Christ heals you. Get up. Take your mat. Immediately Aeneas got up. And all those who lived in Lydda and Sharon saw him and turned to the Lord. In Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha, which is translated as Dorcas. Both words mean gazelle. One is the Hebrew word, one is the Greek word. So she was gazelle. We call her gazelle in English. So that's why there's two names. Who was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near Joppa. So when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, please come at once. And Peter went to them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them out of the room. Then he got down on his knees and prayed. Turning towards the dead woman, he said, "Tabitha, get up." And she opened her eyes. And seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. And then he called the believers and the widows and presented her to them. This became known all over Joppa. And many people believed in the Lord. And Peter stayed in Joppa for some time with a tanner named Simon. You know what happens after that? He has a dream of a cloth coming down, and all the consequences of that are enormous. But here the emphasis is on Peter. Did you notice that he was travelling around? That's an interesting idea. A kind of ministry on the move. Have you ever thought of that? That these are probably groups of Christians who, after the persecution of Stephen, just got scattered. They were like refugees, and they were clustered in different places. That verse 31 is the first reference to, to Galilee and Samaria. There's no reference to churches in those places prior to this, but now he's going through Judea, Galilee and Samaria. And in this case, he's going towards the coast. But there were these groups of people. And the first thing to notice that he takes a team with him. And he goes there in order to strengthen. That's the first point I want you to note from the text. The second thing is that he stepped out of kosher Judaism. That this is not Jerusalem anymore. He's gone to the coast. That's why, what's her name? Dorcas had two names. She had a Greek name and a Jewish name. Why? Well, because it was a mixed community. There were Gentiles there and there were Jews there. So Peter has moved out of synagogue country. There's no reference to a synagogue here. He's moved out of synagogue country and he's taking the gospel to a mixed Gentile country. And there's no arguing. He doesn't go and argue from the prophets on this occasion. He does something far more visible, something that people can relate to straight away. And you have this paralytic, verse 33, Aeneas. And it's quite interesting what he does. Aeneas, Peter said to him, Jesus Christ heals you. If you actually look at the remember Peter at the Gate Beautiful with the paralytic? It's almost word for word the same methodology. It's almost as if he's seen how Jesus did it and copied Jesus at the Gate Beautiful. It worked. So what does he do when he finds a cripple? I'll come back to that. He implements what he's seen the Lord Jesus do in mission. And in Acts 3, he preaches from the miracle. That the miracle is done, that gets people attention. And then, of course, that you've got the sermon outlined. So what's happening here? That Peter is travelling to an area which is Jewish Gentile. He's not taking the same approach that he would use in Jerusalem, but he's still expecting God to work. He isn't going on his own into Lydda and Sharon. He's going with an operational faith, an active faith. It's not a theoretical thing. He's stepping out of his comfort zone, expecting God to convict people, arrest their attention, draw them, heal them. And he's operating in that kind of faith expectation. And verse 35, there is this great turning. The whole place starts to seek the Lord. We call it a revival. And gospel power, of course, then becomes visible. But why? Well, because the people, the Gentiles and the Jews of those areas saw something and heard something. The gospel was seen and it was heard. And God is intervening. And this leads to Cornelius. And just this whole sense of expectation. We're going to church planting, we're not expecting a lot. Well, don't go then. oh, we're going to do some evangelism over there, but it's hard ground, we're just going to do it. Well, you probably better stay at home, watch the telly. That I remember once with a leader, and they were talking about somebody that was poor. I said, well, let's go and pray for him. And they said, oh, better not do that. I said, why not? I said, well, God might not heal him, and they'll be even more upset. And I thought, what? That we must live in the expectation. That's what Peter's doing here. He then goes down to Joppa. That's modern day Jaffa, as we would call it. And he meets the gazelle. Or he doesn't meet her, of course, because she's died by this point. Why did they ask him to go? It was a kind of mission to nowhere. I mean, the woman is dead. Were they expecting him to raise it? Why? Is this an auspicious opportunity for a gospel mission? But in 38, they say, come. It certainly wasn't a promising prospect for someone to go. Now notice this. He goes, he's taken upstairs, and he prays. If you read Mark 5, I'll read part of it to you. And when he had entered and said to them, this is Jesus in Mark 5, why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but... And they laughed at him, and he put them all outside, took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and went in, and taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha cumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the child got up. In this reference, I don't know if you noticed, that the narrative changes one letter. The procedure that Peter adopts is exactly the same as what Jesus did. The letter he changes, he doesn't say Talitha cumi, he says Tabitha. He doesn't say little girl, he uses the child's name. And so Peter is just doing what he saw Jesus had done, and he was expecting God. He wasn't afraid. He knew and experienced Jesus well enough, and despite appearances, he went. We balk at this. Oh, this is not a good time to plant over there. I mean, there's all kinds of trouble. Who says that's not a good time to plant? It wasn't a good time to plant in Joppa either. But he still went. And the result, of course, verse 42, is this massive turning of people seeking the Lord Jesus and the gospel having wide effect. Now, just let me ask the question. Why Peter was a stranger? The widows and the family are all gathered round this dear lady, and they let a stranger go upstairs. Why? Well, because Dorcas was, quote, a disciple. Her conduct and what she'd done for people had produced a willingness in the wider population and a sense of credibility of these Christians, so he could actually walk in and go straight to the body. That is amazing. Normally, you wouldn't have that. But Peter is given that access because of what the woman had done. And verse 39, if you're a Greek scholar, is in the middle voice. They weren't just holding the clothes up. They were wearing them. These are the people who had benefited personally from this woman. The people around her were the people that she clothed with her kindness and her mercy and her care and helping the poor, and her ministry of clothing. That it says in verse 36 that she was known for doing good. That's quite a telling thing. Now, people did respond because of their raising from the dead, but they started responding before that. They started responding because they knew that these are the people who'd inspired this lady to do these things in our community, therefore welcome him, let him go straight to the body. I think that's a point worth making. that mercy and miracle go together. They're a platform that cause people to listen to what you're going to say. In the same way that Acts 10:38 says that Jesus went about doing good. It's the same phrase as Dorcas used. So there are some challenges there for us in terms of how we do mission. Now, moving on, you remember in the morning session, we looked at the aspects of mission. And I tried to explain them quickly. I'm not going to go through them again. But I am going to go through them again, but just kind of making our description of them more in terms of how we do mission. Now, take the religious question. Wales has been a country of Christendom where people that didn't go to church, if they didn't believe in God, they didn't believe in the Christian God. And if they didn't go to church, they might feel a little bit bad about it and thought that they should. That was Christendom. Everybody's a kind of nominal Christian, and some people are proper Christians because they go to church. That was the Christendom model. It's gone now. People don't feel that they should go into a dead, boring chapel at all. They just don't. If they've gone all of their lives, they may still turn up for 3/4 of an hour and then go home and feel they've done their religious duty. But actually, in secular Wales, pulling people into a building, as opposed to outreaching to where people are, it has to be the latter, not the former. That doesn't mean to say that people won't come into the building because of the latter. But if we only do the former, we're not understanding the religious context of Wales. In the same way with geography, that Wales is a land of villages. We are scattered communities. People are very loyal to their locality. They want to go to their local group of Christians. Now, some will travel. The English will travel. They're used to travelling. And they will travel and make some churches look bigger because half the people there are from across the border. But there's something in the Welsh psyche that values the local. So as somebody said in one of the soundings, we don't want churches of thousands. We need thousands of churches. We need them everywhere. We need gospel communities everywhere. But if we're going to have gospel communities, somebody's got to do what Peter did. Somebody's got to travel to the small groups to nurture them. In terms of ethnicity, we have to be sensitive. Sometimes we have grown up in a culture which is still largely Christendom. Lots of people are very open to the gospel. But Peter went into a Gentile community and he had to change his tack. He had to be sensitive to ethnicity. In terms of culture, I don't know how countercultural it was for a complete stranger to walk into that upper room and say to the widows, "Hey, out of it." I suspect that was culturally insensitive. But Peter wasn't married to culture. He would use culture, he understood it, but he wasn't married to it. In terms of social, to me, it's the figures that we saw, it is a no-brainer. If we persist in thinking that all we've got to do is talk to people without them seeing changed lives, and loving Christians that serve others because they've got new hearts, and seeing the power of God and the evidence of God convicting and converting lives and making people better, why would they believe us? Why would they listen to a Christian rather than a Buddhist because they've been told that they're all the same? It's seeing the gospel visible which gives credibility for people to listen. In terms of politics, that Caesar is friendly at the moment. He won't always be friendly. In fact, he's got a bit of a frown on his face at the moment, but we perhaps need to make hay while the sun shines. I'm sure there's a Bible verse for that, but we'll stay with the hay. So that's the kind of background that I'm thinking of, that Peter didn't go to a synagogue. He went to where the people were, that he read the culture and responded appropriately. He went to a mixed group of people. He was prepared to go with culture, but then he wasn't prepared to be married to it. And It was the good works of the lady that opened the door. The miracle came as a consequence. And I have to say, there's very, very little evidence of churches seeing lost people become found people, where the people are out there don't think that those Christians are worth listening to. That sometimes the way we behave is so badly they can't hear a word we say, and that's all inherent in what Peter has said. I'd like to bring 4 issues which we can then talk about that arise from this. They're pretty obvious because I've harped on about them already. What are the implications of Peter's ministry for the next decade? Well, we need teams that move. Apparently, Waleswide we've run out of copies of Ministry on the Move, so we've produced some more for you. It's cheaper now than it was in its first edition. So, for goodness sake, if you haven't read it, if you have read it, read it again. Because actually, lots of people read it and said, "Oh, that's very good, David, very interesting." We didn't do anything about it. Very few people, actually, very few churches, we're so independent, we don't have a Titus. Crete had a Titus, somebody who could come in, who knew the church, who could straighten out and finish off and help with the appointment of leaders. That's what Titus did to Crete. He wasn't the pastor. He was coming through. If you read the letter by chapter 3, he said, and when you leave, so-and-so's coming, and so-and-so's coming, and so-and-so's coming. There was a throughput of people coming, not governing the local church, serving the local church. And as long as we hold to an independency, we don't want anybody coming here telling us what to do, that we will remain vulnerable and weak. There are people that can help us do what we're doing better. But that isn't the old sense of moving. We need to have movement in terms of doing something, not just being static. But we need also to move where the believers are. Dolgellau needs Christians to move in, preferably Welsh-speaking Christians, who can be a gospel community and live the gospel in a community where at the moment it's largely a question of old-fashioned chapel. And we need that people to move and to advance and go. I remember, I don't know if you remember Bill Lawler, he was a church planter who had a go in the valleys, Merthyr Valley. He's an American. And he came out with a statistic in one of the Waleswide working group meetings. He said, there's a research done in America, so that doesn't disqualify it completely. And he said that churches were asked, when will you be ready to church plant? And the churches of 1,000 said, when we're 10% bigger. The churches of 100 said, when we're 10% bigger. And the churches of 50 said, when we that was the broad results of this research, Bill said. And the truth is, at one level, we'll never be ready. It isn't a question of readiness, it's a question of call and obedience, of having a sense of what God wants us to do, and then getting off our butts and doing it. And that's what Peter did. He went and visited and travelled to see the scattered and serve the scattered community. So I know I wrote it, but I'm just saying it might be time for us all to read Ministry on the Move again and say, have we missed something? I suggest that to you. Certainly Peter would agree with me. I say. But I would, wouldn't I? Secondly, not only do we need to move, we need to equip. We need to identify future team members and people who will be the leaders of the next generation. And we need to identify them, and we need to equip them and envision them and help them do the business. That we need to train and adopt and gather and teach by doing. It's more than sitting in a classroom. You don't need to get a degree in church planting. You need to go and spend time with faith that have been doing church planting. You catch it. You don't learn it academically or theoretically. And so we need to take young people to where there's life and good models and faith so that they can learn by seeing and copying. But we have to do it. We have to take the next generation under our arm and say, yeah, you can become a banker, and you'll be filthy rich if you do, and you'll be out of the will if you do, but you won't need my will because there's no money in it. But no, we don't want you to shrivel down to doing that. We want you to church plant in Builth Wells. What about that, my son? What about that young convert of my ministry? And notice that Paul, it's very interesting. The teams that he took with him were changing all the time. He seemed to pick people up, take them with him, let them see it, and then they went off and he brought somebody else onto the team. I would suspect that we need to do the same. And I made this point last time. Do you remember I was talking about the church in Ephesus and how all the churches in that province were planted out of Ephesus, even though Paul never went to the places, Laodicea and Pergamon and so on. That he stayed in the school hall of Tyrannus, equipping people who went and established those churches. And I suggested that, in the same way that Jesus equipped 70 and sent 70 for a nation the size of Israel. Well, Israel's about the same size as Wales geographically. And wouldn't it be outstanding if Jesus thought he needed 70 for Israel, if we raised up 70 godly, able, envisioned, full of faith leaders and sent them with teams, with 70 we could change the face of Wales. And if we do that, the gospel will be gossiped all over Wales, and what will follow that in terms of the moving of the Spirit? So we need teams. I leave that one with you. I think there's something that all leaders need to give serious thought to. And this one is obvious. I'm going to say it again. We need to be open with the gospel. Honest, unapologetic. Yeah, we're wanting to help you get out of debt, but we're Christians. And we don't only want you to get out of debt with the bank, we want you to get out of debt with God. We want you to know him. This is the gospel. This is my testimony. I can't do that sort of thing. And I would say we need to be doing that in everything we do, in loving and caring and serving people. Because Jesus is still working. People come to faith by hearing. We need to put the message into everything we do and reject this idea. If we're just around people, they become Christians by osmosis. No, they won't. People become Christians by hearing, and hearing the word of God, and coming under a conviction of need and of sin and of believing in Jesus. That's the gospel. That's how people become Christians. And if we're going to that, we're going to have to love the gospel, know the gospel. We have to talk to each other about the gospel, tell it well, love it, live it, sing it. Sometimes I'm grieved in Christian gatherings where we sing about everything, but we don't sing about the most important thing. Sing the gospel. Make it the centre of our worship. Model the gospel. Have your testimony ready. So when your neighbour says, what's happened to you? Oh, I'll think about it and let you know tomorrow. No, tell them now. Be ready. Be very clear. Talk about Jesus. Tell them who Jesus is. Tell them who he is and what he's done and what he can do for them. That's the gospel. The fourth thing is this whole question of the gospel being seen and heard. And I have to say that the research tells us that declining churches don't do both. And the churches that do both, with the gospel on the leading edge, there are more growing churches in that category than in any other. I didn't invent the figures. The figures have been checked by those who want rigour, and they speak for themselves. And the presence and work of God must be evident and expected. People need to see. We need Tabithas. We need people who, by their good deeds, earn the right for Peter to come in and be heard. And then lastly, we need Tabitha to live in Joppa. Commando Christians that go in and do something and then run. That we need gospel communities, so people can see that their neighbours are Christians and want to know why. They need to see our good works and glorify our Father who is in heaven. The idea of having a kind of Christian cathedral that people travel 30 miles to must surely be countercultural. Nothing wrong with having a big church, but surely the bigger the church, the more local expressions that church should have, rather than having one central expression. Those are the practical outworkings. I want to start a debate. I don't want you just nodding like donkeys and think, oh, David was interesting, away we go, carry on as normal. Those four things are things that each of us as leaders must go away with and think about doing something about. But before we do that, we'll go back into our 3s and 4s. I've changed it this time so that it's a little bit more, not what could we do, but how do people see and hear your church's gospel at the moment? How are we doing it? Maybe that in your little group triplet, there will be somebody else that says, oh, that's a good idea. So that's the first. The second question, in what ways does my church need to move? Move people? Move to support a smaller church? Move to equip? Move to pray? Move to send? How do we need to move? By being static, we will change nothing. So, what does move mean for us in our local church? You can put move as item number 1 on the next elder's agenda for when you get together. Move. And they say, what's that about? Let me explain. And 3, what is our honest expectation for mission in Wales in the next decade? Big question. What do we have faith for? So what is our honest expectation? I hope after today that your expectation will have risen somewhat and there will be a greater confidence. Thanks very much. Bless you. Back to groups.